The knock came at 9:17 p.m. I know the exact time because I was watching the old grandfather clock in the hall, its pendulum swinging with a hypnotic, rhythmic slowness that measured out the silence of my empty house. The kettle was just beginning to hum on the stove, a low, expectant thrum that promised the small comfort of a cup of chamomile tea. It was a Tuesday, a night like any other since Helen passed, filled with quiet routines and the ghosts of conversations that would never happen again. The knock wasn't loud, not the frantic pounding of a teenager locked out or the cheerful rap of a neighbor. It was a firm, official sound. Two distinct, resonant thuds that vibrated through the old wood of the door and straight into my bones. For a moment, I didn't move. In a town this small, an unexpected knock after dark was rarely good news. It was either a politician looking for a late vote or someone whose car had broken down. I hoped for the politician. I shuffled to the door, my slippers whispering against the worn hardwood floor. My joints ached with the damp chill of the evening. Through the peephole, the world was distorted into a fishbowl lens of flashing blue and red lights, painting the wet driveway in sickening, silent strobes. My heart, a tired old muscle, gave a painful lurch. Two police officers stood on my porch, their faces grim and shadowed under the brims of their caps. Their shoulders were broad, filling the entire frame of the peephole, blocking out the world. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of dust and stale tea, and opened the door. The damp night air rushed in, cold and smelling of rain-soaked asphalt. The younger of the two officers, a man with a face so smooth, he couldn't have been much older than my Maya, shifted his weight from one foot to the other. The older one, his face a roadmap of long nights and bad coffee, met my eyes. His gaze was steady, but it was steeped in a kind of practiced pity that made my stomach turn to ice. "Mr. Alastair Finch?" he asked. His voice was low and gravelly, the kind of voice that was used to delivering finalities. "Yes," I managed, my own voice a dry crackle. "Is everything all right, officers?" A stupid question. The flashing lights were screaming that everything was the opposite of all right. The older officer, whose name tag read SGT Miller, took a small, almost imperceptible breath. "Sir, I'm afraid I have some very difficult news. May we come inside?" My mind was a blank, white canvas of static. I stepped back, a mechanical, jerky movement, and let them into the hallway. They brought the cold and the flashing lights in with them, tainting the warm, quiet air of my home. They stood awkwardly on the runner, their black boots looking enormous and out of place against the faded floral pattern Helen had picked out 30 years ago. "Mr. Finch," Miller began again, his eyes refusing to leave mine. "There was an accident this evening. On the interstate, about 10 miles east of town. A multi-car collision." The static in my head grew louder. I could see his mouth moving, but the words seemed to be coming from a great distance. I was vaguely aware of the kettle on the stove beginning to shriek, a high, piercing wail of distress that echoed the scream building in my own chest. The younger officer flinched at the sound, but Miller never broke his gaze. A vehicle was struck head-on by a truck that had lost control. The driver was killed instantly. I stared at him, my brain refusing to connect the dots. What did this have to do with me? Why were they here, turning my quiet Tuesday into a nightmare of flashing lights and terrible, vague pronouncements? "I'm sorry," I said, the words feeling like foreign objects in my mouth. "I don't understand. It's a tragedy, of course, but..." SGT. Miller's face softened with a professional sadness that felt more like a blow than a comfort. "Sir, the car was registered to a rental company. We found a purse on the passenger seat. The identification inside belonged to your daughter, Maya Finch." No, the word was a silent detonation in my skull. It wasn't spoken. It was just a fact, a wall my mind slammed into at full speed. No, not Maya. Not my Maya. My brilliant, funny, vibrant Maya. She was at the university library. She had a final exam tomorrow. She was studying. She was safe. "There's been a mistake," I said. My voice was surprisingly calm, detached. It felt like I was listening to another man speak. My daughter is at the university. She's studying. Sir, Miller said gently, his voice a suffocating blanket of sympathy. The accident was on the route back from the university. We believe she was on her way home. The younger officer finally spoke, his voice thin and reedy. We're so sorry for your loss, sir. Loss. The word hung in the air, heavy and obscene. It was a word for misplaced keys, for a forgotten umbrella. It was not a word for Maya. I felt my knees begin to buckle. The floral pattern of the runner seemed to rush up to meet me. Strong hands gripped my arms, holding me upright. It was the officers, their faces swimming in my vision, their expressions a blur of pity. No, I whispered, the sound finally breaking free from my throat, raw and ragged. No, you're wrong. You have to be wrong. They guided me to the worn armchair in the living room, the one where Helen used to sit and read. I sank into it, the familiar shape of the cushions offering no comfort, only a deeper sense of violation. They were talking to me, saying things about a coroner, about arrangements, about victim support. Their words were just noise, the buzzing of flies against a window pane. The only thing I could hear was the roaring silence where my daughter's future used to be. My Maya. I saw her at 5 years old, her face smeared with chocolate ice cream, laughing with a joy so pure it felt like it could power the sun. I saw her at 12, looking so grown up and terrified on her first day of middle school, turning to give me one last, brave wave before disappearing into the brick building. I saw her just last week, sitting at the kitchen table, her brow furrowed in concentration as she explained her thesis on Renaissance poetry to me, her eyes shining with an intelligence and passion that made my old heart swell with pride. All those moments, all those memories, were now artifacts, relics of a life that had been violently, senselessly extinguished on a wet stretch of interstate. A wave of nausea washed over me. The air was too thick to breathe. I had to get out. I had to get away from these men and their terrible, impossible news. I pushed myself up from the chair, my legs unsteady. The officers moved towards me, their faces etched with concern. Sir, maybe you should sit down. We can call someone for you. A friend? A relative? I need to. I couldn't finish the sentence. I didn't know what I needed. I just knew I couldn't stay there in that room with them. My feet, acting on some instinct my shattered mind couldn't access, began to move. They carried me out of the living room and down the hall, past the gallery of family photos on the wall. Helen and me on our wedding day. A baby Maya, wrapped in a pink blanket. The three of us on a beach, squinting into the sun. Each photo was a fresh stab of pain. My hand found the cool brass of a doorknob. I knew this door. I had stood before it thousands of times. To wake her for school. To bring her a glass of water when she was sick. To say goodnight. It was Maya's room. I don't know why I went there. Perhaps it was a subconscious need to be close to the last place she had been, to breathe the air she had breathed. A morbid pilgrimage to the heart of my grief. I expected to find it empty, a perfectly preserved monument to a life cut short. Her bed neatly made, her books stacked on her desk, the air still holding the faint, sweet scent of her perfume. The thought of that empty room, of its crushing finality, was an agony beyond imagining. Sir, perhaps that's not a good idea. Sergeant Miller's voice called from behind me, soft with caution. I ignored him. My hand trembled as I turned the knob. I pushed the door open, bracing myself for the wave of desolation that was sure to crash over me. The room was dark, save for the pale sliver of moonlight filtering through a gap in the curtains. It fell across the floor, illuminating a discarded sweatshirt and a pair of sneakers. The room wasn't neat. It was lived in. It smelled of her, of lavender and old books and the faint, clean scent of her shampoo. And there, in the middle of the room, was her bed. It wasn't empty. There was a shape under the duvet. A long, still form rising and falling in the gentle, rhythmic cadence of deep sleep. My breath caught in my throat. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic, desperate drumbeat. This was a dream, a hallucination. My grief-addled mind was playing a cruel, final trick on me, conjuring a phantom of my daughter to torment me. It had to be. I took a hesitant step into the room, then another. The floorboards creaked under my weight. The form in the bed stirred, a soft sigh escaping into the quiet of the room. It was a sound I knew better than my own heartbeat. It was the sound of Maya sleeping. My legs felt like lead as I crossed the distance to her bed. My hand, shaking so violently I could barely control it, reached out. I was terrified that my fingers would pass right through her, that the illusion would shatter and leave me alone in the dark with the unbearable truth. But my fingers met with warmth. The solid, living warmth of her shoulder through the thin cotton of her pajamas. She was real. With a surge of desperate hope that felt like madness, I gently pulled back the edge of the duvet. The moonlight fell across her face. Her long, dark hair was fanned out across the pillow. Her eyelashes rested against her cheek. Her lips were slightly parted, and with every slow, even breath, a soft puff of air escaped them. It was Maya, my daughter. She was here. She was safe. She was alive. The world tilted on its axis. The static in my head vanished, replaced by a single clarion note of utter, disbelieving joy. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. I sank to my knees beside her bed, my body trembling with a relief so profound it was physically painful. I wanted to wake her, to pull her into my arms and never let her go, to reassure myself that she was truly, tangibly real. But I couldn't. The sight of her sleeping so peacefully, so utterly unaware of the abyss I had just been staring into, was too precious, too fragile to disturb. I stayed there for a long moment, just kneeling on the floor, watching my daughter breathe. Each rise and fall of her chest was a miracle, a refutation of the horror that had invaded my home. The officers were forgotten. The world outside this room was forgotten. There was only the moonlight, the quiet breathing, and the overwhelming, impossible fact of her existence. Finally, a thought pierced through the fog of my emotion. The police, the accident, the identification. How could such a monstrous mistake have been made? A new feeling began to bubble up through the relief. A cold, sharp anger. Someone had put me through hell. Someone had pronounced my child dead. I needed answers. I rose to my feet, my movements stiff and robotic. I pulled the duvet back over Maya's shoulder, my hand lingering for a second on her warm skin. I backed out of the room, pulling the door almost closed, leaving just a small crack so I could still hear the sound of her breathing. It was my anchor to sanity. I walked back into the hallway. The two officers were standing exactly where I had left them, their faces a mixture of confusion and professional concern. They looked at me, then at the closed bedroom door, then back at me. "Mr. Finch," Sergeant Miller said, his voice hesitant. "Is everything okay?" "She's in her room," I said. My voice was no longer the weak, broken thing it had been just minutes before. It was hard, steady, forged in the fires of a terror I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. "She's in her bed. She's asleep." The officers exchanged a bewildered glance. The younger one took a half-step forward. "Sir, with all due respect, shock can make people see things." "It is not shock," I snapped, my voice ringing with an authority that surprised even me. "My daughter is in her room, alive. I want you to come and see. I want you to look at the girl you just told me was dead." They followed me, their heavy boots thudding softly on the floor. I pushed the door open again, wider this time, and flicked on the small bedside lamp. A soft, golden light filled the room, illuminating Maya's peaceful face. She stirred at the light, her brow furrowing slightly in her sleep, but she didn't wake. I turned to face the officers. Their jaws were slack. The color had drained from SGT. Miller's face, leaving his skin a pasty gray. The younger officer looked like he was going to be sick. They stared at Maya, then at me, their professional composure completely shattered. That's impossible," the younger one stammered. "Is it?" I asked, my voice dripping with ice. "You came into my home. You told me my only child was dead. You stood there and watched my world end. And all the while she was here, safe. Explain that to me. Sergeant Miller seemed to recover himself first. He was a professional, and the gears of procedure began to turn again in his head, even through the shock. He pulled out a small notepad. Mr. Finch, I don't know what to say. I have never seen anything like this in 25 years on the force. We need to understand what happened. He turned to his partner. Call dispatch. Get confirmation on the description of the victim. Now. The younger officer fumbled with the radio on his shoulder, his hands shaking. He stepped back into the hallway, his voice a low murmur as he spoke into the receiver. The purse? I said, my mind suddenly clear, latching onto the one piece of tangible evidence they had. You said you found her purse. With her ID? Yes, sir, Miller said, his eyes still fixed on Maya as if she might vanish. A brown leather satchel. It was on the passenger seat. Driver's license, student card, a few credit cards. All in the name of Maya Finch. And then it clicked. A memory from last week. A detail that had seemed so insignificant at the time, now loomed as large as a mountain. Maya, coming home from the university, her face flushed with frustration. Dad, you are not going to believe this, she had said, dropping her keys on the kitchen counter with a clatter. I think someone stole my purse at the library. I put it down for 5 minutes to go to the stacks, and when I came back, it was gone. My whole life is in there. We had spent the next hour on the phone, canceling her credit cards. She had filed a campus police report the next day. She had been meaning to go to the DMV to get a new license, but with her finals, she hadn't found the time. She'd been using her passport for ID and had borrowed an old backpack of mine in the meantime. My daughter's purse was stolen last week, I said to Miller, the words coming out in a rush. She reported it to the campus police at the university. She was in the library. She hadn't gotten around to replacing her license yet. Miller's head snapped towards me. His eyes widened as the pieces fell into place for him, too. The awful, tragic logic of it. Some other poor girl, some thief who had stolen a wallet and, in a cruel twist of fate, had also stolen Maya's identity in death. A girl whose parents were likely at home right now, watching television or reading a book, completely unaware that their own world was about to be shattered. The younger officer came back into the room, his face pale. Sergeant, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Dispatch confirms. The coroner just gave a preliminary description. The victim, she's a brunette, similar height and build to her. He nodded towards Maya. But her hair is shorter, and she has a small tattoo of a butterfly on her wrist. I felt a ghost of a memory, a flicker of an image from when I had picked Maya up from the library a few nights ago. A girl at the next table packing up her books. A girl with short brown hair and, yes, a small, delicate butterfly tattooed on the inside of her wrist. I had noticed it because Maya had been talking about wanting a tattoo, an idea I was not fond of. I think I saw her, I said softly, at the library. She was sitting near Maya's usual spot. A heavy silence descended on the room, thick with the weight of what had happened. The colossal, unforgivable mistake. My personal nightmare had ended, but it was just beginning for another family. A family who would soon get their own knock on the door. But for them, the news would be real. There would be no miracle waiting for them in a quiet bedroom. Sergeant Miller let out a long, slow breath. He looked utterly defeated. Mr. Finch, he said, his voice heavy with a remorse that felt genuine. I am so sorry. There are no words. This is a failure of procedure on a level I can't even comprehend. We should have waited for a visual identification. We were trying to provide notification as quickly as possible, and we failed. We failed you. I looked from his tired, guilt-ridden face to the peaceful, sleeping form of my daughter. The anger I had felt was beginning to recede, replaced by a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. What was the point of anger? It wouldn't change what had happened. It wouldn't erase the memory of those 30 minutes when I believed my child was gone forever. It wouldn't bring back the poor girl who had died on that highway. Just go, I said, My voice quiet. Just leave us alone. They didn't argue. They turned and walked out of the room, their footsteps heavy with shame. I heard them speaking in low voices in the hall. The front door opened and closed, and then the flashing lights that had painted my driveway in hues of red and blue were gone. The silence they left behind was different from the one that had been there before. It was deeper, more fragile, felt sacred. I went back to Maya's bedside and pulled up the small chair from her desk. I sat down and just watched her. I watched the way her brow would twitch in a dream, the way her hand was curled loosely by her cheek. I studied the mole just above her eyebrow, the one I used to kiss for good luck before every school play and soccer game. I catalogued every tiny, perfect, living detail of her. The minutes stretched into an hour. I thought about Helen. I thought about how she would have handled this. She would have been stronger than me. She would have made the officers tea and demanded a full, written report before they left. But then, I thought of the moment she had passed, in that sterile hospital room, and the silence that followed her last breath. I had thought I knew what loss was. I had thought I understood the shape of that particular void. I was wrong. Tonight, I had learned that grief has infinite, terrifying depths. I had stared into the abyss, and the abyss had blinked. Around midnight, Maya began to stir. Her eyes fluttered open, bleary with sleep. She saw me sitting there and a small, confused smile touched her lips. "Dad?" she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. "What are you doing? Is it morning already?" The tears I had been holding back began to fall again, but this time they were quiet, warm tears of gratitude. I reached out and took her hand. It was warm and strong in mine. "No, sweetie," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "It's not morning. I was just checking on you." She squeezed my hand, her eyes still half closed. "You're weird," she murmured affectionately, and then she was asleep again. I didn't tell her that night. I didn't tell her the next morning. I let her go off to her final exam, watching her walk down the driveway with her old backpack slung over her shoulder, a walking, talking, breathing miracle. I let her have one more day of blissful ignorance. How do you tell your child that for half an hour you thought she was dead? How do you explain the unexplainable? That evening I made her favorite dinner, spaghetti carbonara. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she had told me about her stolen purse, the same table where she had explained Renaissance poetry. The evening light was soft, and the house was filled with the smell of garlic and bacon. It was all so painfully, beautifully normal. And I told her everything. About the knock, the officers, the accident, the identification. I watched her face as she processed the story, saw the color drain from her cheeks, saw her eyes widen with a fear that mirrored my own. When I was finished, she was silent for a long time, her fork frozen over her plate. "So that girl, the one who died," she finally said, her voice small. "She was driving home, just like I would have been, on the same road, at the same time." "Yes," I said quietly. She looked down at her hands. "It could have been me." It was the thought that had been haunting me for 24 hours. The terrifying randomness of it all. A stolen purse, a different car, a matter of minutes. The razor-thin line between being here and being gone. "But it wasn't," I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "It wasn't you." We didn't say much more after that. We finished our dinner in a comfortable silence, both lost in our own thoughts. Later that evening, we sat on the couch and watched an old movie, the kind we used to watch with Helen. At some point, Maya leaned her head on my shoulder, just as she had when she was a little girl, and I put my arm around her. I held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the steady, living beat of her heart against my arm. In the days that followed, a strange new clarity settled over me. The world seemed both more dangerous and more beautiful than it had before. Every sunrise was a gift. Every shared laugh was a treasure. Every mundane moment, making coffee, talking about the weather, watching her study, was imbued with a profound sense of significance. I had been given a glimpse of a world without her. And now, in a world that still had her in it, everything was brighter, sharper, more precious. I read in the local paper about the girl who had died. Her name was Sarah. She was 21, a nursing student. She had a family who loved her. Her funeral was on a Saturday. I didn't go, that felt like an intrusion. But I sat in my garden and thought of her, and I thought of her parents, who were now living in the world I had only visited for 30 minutes. I felt a deep, abiding sorrow for them, an empathy born from the worst kind of imagination. Life is so fragile. We build our routines and our plans. We believe in the solid ground beneath our feet. But the truth is we are all just walking on a thin sheet of ice over a deep, cold ocean. We never know when it might crack. The knock on the door taught me that. But it also taught me something else. In the face of that fragility, the only thing that truly matters is love. The fierce, desperate, unconditional love a father has for his daughter. It is the only thing strong enough to stare into the abyss and not be consumed. It is the anchor in the storm. And as I watched Maya laugh with a friend on the phone a week later, her voice filling the quiet house with life, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that I was the luckiest man in the world.